In just 1 or 2 decades ago, AI was our imagination in scientific movie, sci-fi movie. But look at now, AI is happening. It is evolving. It is already applied and can be applied and will be applied in many different areas. Next, please join me and welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Andrew Batten, Managing Director of Hyperform Consulting, to bring us his keynote speech focusing on AI. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you. Ni hao. If you think the title of this is possible to cover in 15 minutes, then I think if you think it's not possible, then I think I would agree it's not possible. It's too much. So I'll tell you what I will talk through, and that is I'll say who I am, and why I am here. And at the end, I would like to talk about some suggested changes in the emerging behavior of startups. Now, okay, so can you see that? Yeah. Shall I just come here? Okay, so you may have detected that I am from the UK, and I just wanted to say a little bit about startups in the UK. Actually, there are many startups at the moment. In the last 10 years, there has been a tremendous growth. No one knows quite why. The government says it's all down to them, but I think there's many reasons. The important point now is that there are 6,000 just around London, actually. There are 83 incubators, 10 catapults. So a catapult is a government drive for growth in a certain technology. There's lots of investment and from both Europe and from Silicon Valley. And there are many unicorns, not as many as America, not as many as China, but next is the UK, I think. Now, what I wanted to talk about in terms of the reason why I am here is because I see potential synergy between those startups in the UK and the capability of Taiwan. And in fact, I'm employed here by Ministry of Science and Technology, NCTU, Gloria, the Gloria program, which acts as a bridge between the startups in the UK or the startups globally and the semiconductor ecosystem in Taiwan. So I think that bridge will be very useful for startups who are a long way away, but they want to take advantage from Taiwan's specialities. So the three topics, I thought I would mention AI first. There's, of the 6,000 startups, then there are roughly 500 in AI. So it's very popular. I've put up a few examples here from the last month. Usually each month there's about another 5 or 10 startups in AI, just AI. And if you, the first point that I want to make is about the nature and the motivation of these startups. Now, the traditional motivation of startup is to make as much money as possible in as little time as possible. There is the so-called 3 Bs of startups. Get backing, get big, and get bought. Now, my perception is, although that has worked very well and still works to some extent, there is a new behavior emerging that we can see, where the purpose is a little more humane a little more about changing the world and less about making money and cashing out. And the first two examples perhaps demonstrate this. AI helping with food, with health, personal health, and the second one helping with the use of time for leisure and lifestyle. So that is a trend which I wanted to highlight because it's one of my three conclusions of this talk. And then moving on to the topic of Internet of Things, then I've selected one thing to talk about, maybe the most boring thing in the world, which is a hearing aid. And up until now, no one, especially millennials in this audience, would have much interest about hearing aids. But a hearing aid has a sensor and an actuator, or input-output. Now it's IP-enabled. This one is IP-enabled. There can be an API, and there can be data, usage data made available. So all of a sudden, this device is an ecosystem, a small ecosystem, and entrepreneurs can look at use cases for this. And there are some examples, if you can see it in this, basically using the ability to hear to send messages in to say the doorbell is ringing, or there is some important news you need to deal with. And also, because the hearing aid can hear, it can also hear the voice of the person wearing it, who can give commands to devices. So just one example of Internet of Things, and of course, outside many more examples. In my previous firm, BT in telecommunications, I was asked towards the end to look at IoT strategy and the question, where can we make some money? Which I think is the wrong question, but anyway, I had to look at it. And the first driver, the biggest driver at that time, was smart city. And if you look at the next slide, you can see why. There's just so many new use cases for smart city. Now, if you go to Hall 1, then you can get a much better feel for all the new platforms and technologies that are being applied to smart city. Now, in my career at BT, I spent most of my time on end-to-end product launch and end-to-end startup company processes. And today I work as a consultant in this area still. And the way I think about this smart city, well, let me come back to this. Just before talking about the ecosystem as a whole, I wanted to give an example, or picture actually, of the smart city that I was working at, Milton Keynes, which is about the size of Hsinchu, about 250,000 people. And when it was designed about 20, 30 years ago, it was designed with these paths, sort of vertical and horizontal in a matrix for walking. And now it's actually very useful because it's a testing ground for autonomous vehicles. There's no other cars or traffic. So these can make good use of this and still learn to look out for people, dogs, cats, and so on. So you can see some autonomous vehicles here. The other interesting thing, moving more into AI, is the use of motion data. And basically, there's an enormous amount of data being collected on the motion of residents in the city, where they go to work, where they go shopping, when. So you can look in real time to see where everyone is. Should I go to the shopping mall now? Is it too crowded? Should I go later? Are there queues for the cinema, etc.? So motion map is very useful, and that data is made available on an open basis for entrepreneurs to look at it and create new applications. But my natural way, this is my last slide, by the way. I have 5 minutes, so I'll just talk through this slide. The natural way I think about AIT, Smart City, AI is as an ecosystem. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about this because the second conclusion I want to make is about the importance of ecosystem, and for any budding startup to take on board the need to add the skill of thinking in terms of ecosystem. Not easy, because there's no rule book. A new set of rules is needed. Anyway, at the bottom of this diagram, you can see various vertical columns, and these columns represent the area of government of a city. Water, energy, waste, transport, and so on. And in each of these verticals, you will find the requirements or the use case that is needed for a new improvement. So to implement that, then I'm showing that as a horizontal, simplified single box, and in that box there is all the communications networks, sensors, data systems, cloud, third-party gateways, APIs, etc. Security all the way around. So all of that is contained in one box, and it's shared amongst all the users. And the natural companion of those is education. So the smart city requires people to invent solutions and people to create new businesses. These are different types of people, usually. Inventor, entrepreneur. If you look at Apple as an example, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, or an older British example, Mr. Rolls, Mr. Royce. So inventor, entrepreneur. The two go together. So education needs to provide a stream of both these types of people, and then communications to reach out to citizens. So communications exercises to include the citizens and business people and students. So that is a typical smart city program, and the one I was involved in at Milton Keynes operated with that. But then if you look at the top half of this diagram, you have the stakeholders shown as sort of round floating bubbles, which is because at this level there is no structure, there's no rule book. You need to connect these people. But it's somewhat chaotic, that they will come together for certain projects and then you connect others for certain projects. And it raises a question mark. So the first question on this slide is about governance. You know, how do you govern this sort of ecosystem? Now, I don't have an answer for this, but it is a question that has to be understood in order to make progress with these smart city ecosystems. The second question is similar, and it's about leadership, but specifically, who is in charge? So if you look at this, then you have the government stakeholders at the bottom, customers, if you like, and then various developers, universities, businesses, and so on. But who is in charge? And it's a bit like the orchestra this morning, actually in here. They all have their skills, but they need a conductor. And at the moment, it's not obvious who the conductor is for smart cities. The next point I wanted to raise is about ethics. And this is an observation that I think is relevant for all startups to digest. So ethics can be seen as a set of regulatory requirements to comply with, but we see some CEOs of startups challenging the rule book and saying, well, actually, I want to guarantee my employees a job, even if their performance dips. And I think ethics can be taken further, proactive ethics. And then finally, purpose. So companies that have a strong purpose, like Apple, who challenge the status quo, are very successful. People buy Apple products because of that purpose. There's a very good speaker on this topic, much better than me, Simon Sinek. He makes this point very well, that when you buy an Apple product, it's not just the PC or the laptop or the MP3 player you're buying the company's purpose. You're buying into Apple. So I mentioned the 3 Bs before. Get backing, get big, get bought. So I'd like to suggest, in conclusion, an alternative to that, or maybe an additional 3 Ps, which is purpose and partnerships, aka ecosystems, and the principles, aka ethics. And I think my observations are that the startups who are absorbing these 3 Ps are having greater traction, and they are in the mood of the current sort of changes in attitude in society as a whole. Okay, so that concludes the presentation, and I hope that was interesting and useful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batten.